I'm Alex Beatty, divorce prep coach, aka the divorce planner. I love these conversations I have with different professionals and always utilizing their experience to help people who are considering a marital separation or divorce. Today's guest is one of my favorite, Kim Polinder, relationship coach. You can find her here on Instagram, on TikTok, on all of your fabulous social medias at KP Counseling. I hope that's correct because I know that's what it is here.
Right.
And without further ado, I'm just going to jump into this 20-minute conversation. But if anybody has a question about this subject, feel free to drop it into the comments and we will definitely get to them. So I'm going to kind of like kick it off with the million-dollar question, if you will, right? So how do you really know when it's time to kind of end your marriage?
Yeah, I get this question so often, almost asking me for permission to leave a relationship. So, a good start is understanding what your values are. Meaning, this isn't a morality question, although for some cultural influences might say that divorce is a no-no, but it's really what are your priorities? Because once you're set on your values of what's a deal breaker specifically, then you have a better idea of what decisions will either keep you closer to those values or violate those values. And that's the basis of integrity. So understanding what's important to you, cheating multiple times, how does forgiveness play out in your life? How do betrayals play out in your life? That sort of thing. What is your reason for leaving? And when you really sit with this, the next question I have for someone is, how much have you given them the chance to succeed?
Yeah.
Do they know specifically what you want? Whenever I talk to people about their goals, they talk in generalities such as, we need more open communication. I want to feel closer to them. I want to have better goals in life. And they sound nice on paper, but what does your partner know what to do with that? So in specifics, does your partner know how to succeed in this relationship with you? And then after that, it's since you've brought it up to them, since they've had the handbook, so to speak, what's the progress? What's the effort? Is it all talk? Your behaviors will always expose who you are. So talk is cheap. Your behaviors will always expose what your mindset is, what your values are, what your beliefs are. So pay attention to
Wow.
actions.
That I love that you said that your behaviors are always going to reveal what your actual intentions are, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's let's see here. I'm going to just jump into the segue, which is like, what are some signs or feelings that might indicate to somebody that, boy, I'm kind of at a critical point in this relationship and I'm not sure I think it's time to move on, but how do I act on that? So it's kind of expanding on what you just said. Now that you feel like you've come to this realization, what can you do to actively, I think, check all the boxes? No, I think most people don't go into a divorce kind of lightly, right? We go through a process. There's an examination, there's deep introspection, but what are those kind of like next steps if you're having those feelings?
Yeah. First of all, your mind will tell you everything you need to know as to what's behind the struggle with this, whether it's making too many excuses for them, whether it's not giving them enough grace, whether it's being too narrow-minded, whatever it is. When you think about breaking up with this person, divorcing this person, maybe splitting up the family, divorce is not an easy decision, especially when your lives are enmeshed. Maybe it's a blended family situation. A lot of other lives can be affected by your decision. So when you think about splitting up from this marriage, what comes up for you? Do cultural influences, family values, like you can't get divorced. I don't care what the reason is. Are you a failure in your marriage? Did you not give enough? Is it your fault? Is it all their fault? So whatever your reaction is to splitting up, it'll give you a really good idea of what your core wounds are in life, what your core triggers are, how you handle the raw truth. If you can handle the raw truth, or is it just all their fault? Because in any situation, it takes two. And this is another good aspect to bring up, and that is that I'll get a lot of questions from people like, I've done everything you've said in your videos. XYZ, I've been specific, I've expressed my needs, and they're still not doing what I want. Our relationship isn't improving. What more can I do? And to me, that's a little bit of warning sign that perhaps you're not giving enough accountability to the other person. It's a delicate dance and a delicate balance to understand, is it too much accountability on me or too much accountability on them? But you can be the most perfect communicator, do everything textbook, and your partner may still not want to improve the relationship. And that behavior, like I said, behaviors will always expose your mindset. If they're not willing to put any effort into the relationship, if they don't see it as a 911, they're telling you that they're satisfied. Maybe they're not happy and super thrilled about the relationship, but it's good enough. They don't see whatever issue you're bringing up as a big enough issue to have further talks about, to work it out like, okay, what can we do about this? If a person doesn't agree that an issue is an issue, they're going to do nothing about it.
Mhm.
So, do they even agree that what you see as an issue is an issue?
Mhm.
So, it takes two.
I think that's great. There's so much to unpack in that answer. I mean, most people who've been in a long-term relationship, marriage, usually there's a good chunk of time where there's been an issue. It's not as if all of a sudden we're butting heads on something and now this is the end. It's usually been a long path. You know, I think people would be surprised to know I actually a good chunk of my coaching clients are people that are more at a crossroads. They're investing just as much into, you know, working with a relationship coach and seeing if they can kind of break through and make strides that better the relationship and give them new tools and can allow them to hear each other, as well as preparing for, if this happens to go towards divorce, at least I'm prepared and I know what lies ahead. In terms of, with me, it's more preparing for the legal stuff, right? But I think more than anything, what you said is so interesting. Like, the proof is in the pudding. Like, if somebody is just listening and not taking action, that's a really good indicator. And I know that people wrestle with a lot of guilt, as you brought up. Perhaps it's societal expectations or familial, and then it's hard to kind of say, okay, well, I have to end this, but this feels like such a reflection of a failure on my part or something, that there can be a lot of shame. I know we've talked about that in previous conversations. Like, what steps can you take to approach this with kindness and clarity for yourself as well as your partner?
I love Gabor Mate's approach of compassionate inquiry, is what he
Mhm.
calls it. It's this idea of compassionate curiosity. When we so often, sorry, I'm getting over a cold.
Take-
When we so often lean towards conclusiveness. I'm going to get a glass of
Please.
water just for a minute.
And while you are getting a glass of water, I'm just going to invite anybody who has a question about kind of being at this crossroads, if you're struggling with knowing what to do next, if you're like you're not sure what's going to happen with your relationship, feel free to drop it in. I know there were a couple comments earlier about this idea of, you know, marriage is sacred. Why would you consider divorce? Why would you consider divorce? Because sometimes people grow apart. Everyone is thrown challenges in life. People lose jobs, people get sick, and sometimes relationships end. So, to Philip's comment, who dropped it in earlier, kind of walking through life with an awareness that everyone gets challenges thrown at them, and facing them with compassion and kindness is where it's at, and not placing judgment on others going through it. So, Kim, I'm sorry, where you were when we left off was just kind of speaking to how to, not only with yourself, but with your partner when you're at this crossroads, kind of deal with it with kindness and clarity and compassion.
Yeah, I think for any situation, whatever judgments we have about our partner, whether they're too selfish, they're not advanced enough, they're not being introspective enough, you can always look at what their past is,
Mm-hmm.
put the pieces together with a compassionate perspective of, oh, this person's a drug addict, this person is this or that, and be able to look at them in a different way that involves more understanding and more grace, and seeing this as like a pained person versus someone who's just willingly hurting your feelings and willingly treating you so poorly. And, let's take a partner with anger issues. They're so angry, they treat me so poorly, they just lash out at me, they yell at me. Well, can you imagine what their childhood was like? Can you imagine them being treated the same way, them seeing it modeled, them learning this was the only way for them to be heard, them not feeling empathy from others? They didn't develop empathy for, you, and now you're just kind of like caught in the crossfire of a really painful childhood. So, that's not to make excuses for people, but when you can start to put pieces together, it makes heartbreak and triggers and suffering much more, I don't know if reasonable is the right word, but it makes much more sense where it's not so random and
Mhm.
chaotic. Like, why is this person treating me this way? Why did I end up in a string of bad marriages, a string of bad relationships? What's wrong with me? It eliminates the chaotic aspect of your life and brings more logic, brings more like, oh, that's why. So I don't bring up childhood to drown in childhood, but there's whatever perspective you have, and this is the essence of cognitive behavioral therapy, um, is whatever perspective you have, there's always a reframe.
Mhm.
There's always a different way to look at it. And if you can actually glom on to a reframe,
Mhm.
you can suddenly see why that person's so angry, see why they turn to drinking every night. Yeah, it's not great for the relationship, not great for you. You can make decisions going forward based on your conversations with them and the progress that they make. But at the root of it, to be able to see where it comes from. I believe we're all good people. We're all trying our best, and sometimes things just fall short.
Completely agree with you. I love that you brought up cognitive behavioral therapy. It's retraining of the brain, and it's hard. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of intention to be able to address your own triggers and your own, kind of traumas and responses to behavior to somebody else, and hold them separately from giving that, like being able to listen actively to that other person and really understand them, right? There can be it's a two-way street. It's like, how much work have you done on yourself to be able to allow this other person to also be a work in progress and not take it personally. I think that's a really important point that you brought up, is my actions and my reactions and how I'm living my life, while they might have an effect on you if we're in a relationship, sometimes they're out of my control, because those are all the tools I know. That's as far as I've come. And if I'm not willing to do the work, and if not making that choice to show up in a partnership, because I'm not even taking care of myself, there's just nothing you can do. It's not a reflection on the other partner. It's just a limitation. And I love, again, the cognitive behavioral kind of changing that mindset is really everything, challenging certain thoughts that we have. And especially when it comes to, I think, people feeling like a failure, or why isn't this other person giving this to me? Why are they doing this to me? And kind of stopping and saying, well, what is actually being done? Where am I connecting back to this feeling in my life before, where perhaps I've tolerated it or I've become comfortable with it? It's something that I've been doing a lot of reading on, and so I just find it incredibly fascinating. I just want to ask also, it's like, look, there's this time in life where you're going through like this huge issue with a partner. Your life does not just stop. You're juggling a career, perhaps raising children. Life is going full steam ahead. How can you deal with all of these emotions so that you can hold space for yourself while you're going through this crisis?
Yeah, trying to maintain that compassionate curiosity about yourself is key. And also support. We are not meant to do this alone. And if we feel like we're alone and we stay inside our heads and we isolate and we just like, we don't want to burden others, it makes it 10 times worse. We have to get outside of our head and be able to process things, be able to just receive support. One of the big challenges for many people is learning to receive love. And it sounds so crazy. Like, what do you mean? It's the easiest thing in the world. No, it's not. You look at how you even can receive a compliment, something so small, just a compliment. And you take that on a larger scale of receiving support, receiving love, where you kind of block it. No, 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 I'll do it for you. To the point that if someone, let's say your partner does something nice for you, it might even make you uncomfortable. Like, oh my goodness, it's not balanced anymore. I need to do something nice for you. And then now it's no longer about just a natural exchange of love. It's more about like, I don't want to be more of a burden to you. I'm
Mhm.
more comfortable being more of a burden to you. And then, so learning to receive love is a very big skill to develop and to be conscious of, because when it comes to times of challenging times where we're having difficulties in our relationship and asking these big questions like you're asking today, we need others' opinions who are people we respect, who are grounded, mature, who have relationship experience, who know us, know our blind spots, because we can get on that train and we can just find all the people who will agree with us, like, yeah, they're the bad person, and just like drive that car off the cliff
Mhm.
with no compassion and no accountability for ourselves, or drive that car off the cliff of like I'm treat others to say, hey, you're being really abused, you're being really harmed. It's time to take more protection for yourself. We need those voices as well. So it's not just our blind spots, but when we're not protecting ourselves and setting boundaries and that sort of thing, we need people to weigh in on that. And the only way they're going to be able to weigh in is if they know us.
Yes.
So having that support circle, it's just so critical. You can't do this alone. And if you think you can, I'm guessing you live in a very big swirling vat of anxiety, coupled with depression, coupled with confusion, and thinking that you are the problem.
Yeah.
When if you can start to voice your fears and concerns and insecurities and struggles, then other people will say, oh, yeah, I struggle with that too. All of a sudden, you're more normal, you're less broken, everything's less random and chaotic. You could put the pieces together, and there's a camaraderie and a connection that you feel as being part of a community. Otherwise, isolation can lead to really dark places.
You nailed it on the head. When you go through something like this, when you're at this point in your life, it can feel incredibly isolating. This is the person you've built a life with, that you have created this hope of a future with, and you've had these plans with. And so if that foundation is being rocked, it's really easy to want to kind of shut down. And that's the point where you have to challenge yourself to open up to that person, open up in therapy, working with coach, making sure that I love that you brought up that you want people who are challenging you, right? It's not, I think we all have this idea of if I'm confiding in my friends and they're like, well, the other person is the problem. You're great. We need to have somebody who has not only neutrality, but who also can like play a couple of different options back at us that we might not be considering. You don't want to be, there's no way to heal in a vacuum. You can't grow in a vacuum if you're being told,
Yes.
everything that's easy and that you want to hear. I just had MPS drop something in that I wanted to bring up. They said, I feel really stuck. And when my partner loses control, I feel like my mental and physical health are at risk. And I end up blaming myself when my partner is triggering for some reason. Is there anything
Mm.
to speak to on that, Kim?
Yeah. This is where having that supportive community or having another neutral set of eyes on your situation will help, because I don't know this person. I really appreciate this question. I think it's so relatable,
Yeah.
where it's so easy. The reason why compassionate curiosity is so difficult is because conclusiveness is so soothing. It's just so nice to have that end final answer and that judgment. And it's like, okay, now we can just write it off. The spreadsheet is filled out. We know what's going on, versus having this idea of, okay, if I'm not conclusive about it being my fault, what's the other choice? It's they're contributing to it. Now I just have to wait like a sitting duck for them to change, their addictive behaviors, them to change their abusive behaviors, them to care that I'm struggling so much, care that they're causing so much suffering. Like, who wants to do that? That's why, anger is such an empowering feeling, because it's like it's sexy. It gives you fuel to get up off the couch. Whereas depression, which can also be, a common coping mechanism of sorts or resulting behavior of sorts, is because like you don't see any hope, and now you don't have to get up off the couch, so you can just be safe in not taking action. So, this idea of self-blame is what I heard in that question a lot, is like, I can't help but say it's my fault, because it's a very safe place to be. When you just take it on yourself, children do this all the time. You take it on yourself. It's my fault that my dad went off on me. It's my fault that my mom's so anxious. I couldn't console her. It's my deficiency. It's my fault that my dad went off of me. I clearly did something wrong. I deserved it because we have to preserve that relationship. Whatever happens in the home in childhood, subconsciously we do whatever we have to do to preserve that connection with that parent, even if they're mistreating us. So blaming ourselves is the most common way we can cope with that because you can't blame the parent. What are you going to do? Move out of the house at 6 years old? No, you're not. So blaming yourself, really take a good look at, are you to blame? I don't know you, maybe you are, but I'm guessing that the way you phrase the first part of the question of when my spouse loses control, or however they phrase it, like just comes at me, berates me, I can't help but blame myself. Because what's the alternative? You're going to wait for them to change? It's a horrible place to be.
Terrible. Thank you so much for that really great and just concise answer. I would also say thank you to the person who dropped that in. If you are feeling, mentally and physically unsafe, that is something that needs attention. Please seek help. There's a blog post that I have, how to prepare when you're discreetly preparing for divorce, but I also have one if you're preparing for divorce and you're suffering from an abusive situation. Please go read both of those because there are lots of tips and resources for you to be able to hopefully utilize. First and foremost is if you are not feeling safe, that is a big alarm bell, and you need to consider removing yourself from the situation for your own well-being, even if it's temporarily. Thank you so much. And I also wanted to drop in another comment literally in the middle of this situation, like right now. So thank you. Clearly, you're not alone. Number one, you're not alone going through this. And Kim, you just like it helped two people at the same time. Let's see, I'm just looking through here. I had another comment. I think it made me open to anyone giving me attention. That totally makes sense when we're kind of in a space that perhaps we haven't healed from childhood things, that we are going to be more open to more dysfunctional dynamics in a relationship. I think it's great that you can point that out, that you see that. And that goes back to what Kim was talking about earlier, which is you need to get support. These are things that we can't do on our own, and we shouldn't do on our own. Being able to glean insights and tips and help from others while you're going through it is so important. So we've already blown by my 20-minute marker, but I just have one more thing that I kind of wanted to ask. Let's say you get to the point where, both parties realize the best thing to do really is to part ways. There's a lot that goes into it, kind of like ending a big relationship in whether it's separation or divorce. And we've talked about this before, Kim. Big feelings are going to come up. What kind of like strategies can you implement, or what things can you do to help you as you have to start a new chapter in your life that maybe you weren't expecting to have to navigate?
Yes. It's, when you get to that place where both of you agree that this is the best decision, sure, there might be animosity, there might not, but one thing you can do is to have some sort of ritual around it, whether it's maybe you visit, maybe alone or with them. I don't know if that's really the realistic thing, but visit the places that you used to go to that you hold cherished memories about. Write a letter to them that maybe you don't send to them. Write a letter to yourself that maybe you don't, just some ritual to bring some closure around the end of the relationship. And also, expectations are everything. Expectations, perceptions, they create our suffering. So, having appropriate expectations for what this is going to look like. And when you're ending a relationship, there's going to be grieving. So, giving yourself permission to have the full range of emotions, such as, that's weird, they treated me so poorly, but I miss them. That is normal. Grieving them, hating them, missing them, loving them. Give yourself permission to have dual awareness, competing emotions, to fully feel everything. Otherwise, if you suppress, like, I'm not going to allow myself to miss them, I'm not going to say there was anything good about the relationship, that is going to percolate and it's going to follow you into your next relationship where you can't even talk about your ex without you getting all riled up, and then you have all these mixed confused emotions that have never been touched on, and it stirs up everything about I love them, I hate them, let's not talk about it, and it will affect your next relationship. So get it out now, feel it. Feel the feelings. The only way out is through, and then you will better be able to leave them behind. And just because you have a feeling of I miss them or I love them doesn't necessarily mean you get back together with them, but know that it's normal, and it's normal to have this like up and down. That's the nature of grief. So full permission.
Yeah, and I think people are so surprised, especially if it's like an amicable situation. We both agree this is the end of the relationship. I have clients who are really surprised about in those types of scenarios being overwhelmed by big feelings. Like, I thought I'd be over it. For the last 2 years, we've been struggling and I've been so ready for a split, but why do I feel so sad now? Why am I grieving? And as you said, acknowledging those feelings as they come up rather than suppressing them is so critical, so you can move through them, because they're going to peak out in other ways. If you ignore them,
Yeah.
they will come up and hinder future relationships, because you haven't dealt with your shit, and you just kind of have to do it, even though it's not fun. And it's not fun, but divorce can be a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity for deep introspection about checking in with who you are now at this point in your life, and opening yourself up to creating a life that feels much more aligned with your values and your intentions. And that can be a really good thing. I love that you brought up rituals. I think that is so brilliant. And you mentioned even writing a letter to yourself. I completely agree. I did an episode of Divorce and Beyond, the podcast, where I talked about writing a letter to your future self, just to start kind of picturing what you want your life to look like. Where will you be? Where are you living? What activities are you engaging in? Because I love, when I'm working with people, I love them to start getting a vision of what that life can look like, so they can kind of actively take the steps to get there, and to start get excited about what could be next, instead of focusing too much on the why me and this just happened to me. Sometimes what happens to us happens for us. And our worst moments are not indicative of who we are, nor what our life is all about.
Yes.
But Kim, I love this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. You're
Yeah,
always
thank
a
you.
great guest, and you've just dropped so much important information. For anyone who joined us late, I'm Alex Beatty, divorce prep coach, aka the divorce planner. My guest today was Kim Polinder of KP Counseling, relationship coach. I'm going to be linking this conversation immediately after we wrap, as well as all of Kim's information. But Kim, if somebody who's with us right now is interested in learning more about you or working with you, how can they connect?
You can go to my page, which is KP underscore counseling, just if there's any confusion. I'm on TikTok or Instagram, as you mentioned, and I have my annual retreat coming up, first weekend in October. So if you're in the Palm Springs, California area, I'm going to be doing deep dives on all of this, understanding triggers, conflict resolution, how that plays out, compassionate inquiry, and practicing it in what I call labs in the afternoon, having Q&A for all of your personalized, challenges with the tools, and it's going to be a really transformative weekend. So there's still space, few days left to register. So if you want to join me in person, enjoy some sunshine in Palm
I
Springs.
mean, I love you. Palm Springs, sign me up. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kim. And thank you to everybody who joined us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And Kim, I hope to see you
That's
soon.
right. Me
All right.
too. Thanks, Alex.